Man is condemned to be free. Jean-Paul Sartre. We often say, I chose to do this, or I made that decision. But what do we actually mean by choice? Can we really trace the origin of our decisions to a self that is independent of the universe's complex web of causes and effects? Or is free will, as many suspect, a beautiful illusion, one that comforts us while quietly binding us to necessity? I do not believe in free will as it's popularly imagined, a sovereign, untouched will that somehow escapes the great chain of cause and effect. Such a notion seems to imply a kind of metaphysical magic, something closer to a miracle than a measurable reality. And miracles in the ordinary flow of existence have no place in my understanding. Let us set aside quantum randomness. Chaos is not the same as will. And yet, paradoxically, I do believe that I make choices, such as sitting down to write this script, choosing my morning coffee, or deciding to visit friends. These decisions feel undeniably personal, but how can that be if every effect has its cause? This tension between feeling like a free agent and recognizing a deterministic universe has troubled thinkers for millennia. One fascinating exploration of this contradiction comes from a paper written in 2012 by philosopher John Sellers titled Stoics Against Stoics in Cudworth's A Treatise of Free Will. It delves into a 17th century debate over human agency, where ancient philosophy, Christian theology, and moral responsibility collided in a dramatic intellectual battle. Sellers focuses on Ralph Cudworth, 1617 to 1688, a theologian and philosopher among the Cambridge Platonists, a group of Christian thinkers who attempted to reconcile reason and faith. In his unfinished magnum opus, The True Intellectual System of the Universe, Cudworth rails against three ideas he believed to be enemies of truth: atheism, moral relativism, and determinism. And of those three, it was determinism he feared most. Why? Because determinism undermines the concept of moral responsibility. If every action is the inevitable result of prior causes, then divine judgment becomes a farce, and punishment, both divine and human, loses its ethical grounding. Cudworth believed that if free will were denied, then our entire moral and spiritual architecture would collapse. Cudworth's critique reached deep into classical thought. He focused especially on the Stoic philosophers, who had long debated the concept of fate and moral autonomy. In particular, he examined Cicero's De Fato, a text that outlines the Stoic vision of a universe governed by reason and necessity. In this world, everything unfolds according to logos, divine reason, and even human choices are part of that order. But here lies the contradiction. Stoics like Epictetus taught that our highest good lies in choice, in the things that are up to us. This phrase, ephemen, in Greek, was central to Stoic ethics. Yet if all things are determined, how can anything truly be up to us? Cudworth seized on this inconsistency. He argued that Stoic voluntarism, the belief in personal agency, clashed with their determinism. He effectively turned the Stoics against themselves, showing how their own moral ideals undermined their metaphysical fatalism. He wasn't the first to worry that denying free will might make it impossible to justify punishment. We don't morally condemn animals after all, we simply restrain them. If humans lack agency, then jails become cages, and justice becomes cruelty. While Cudworth's chief enemy was determinism, his most immediate philosophical opponent was not a Stoic, but the infamous Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes, in Leviathan, argued that without a central authority, life would devolve into chaos. Though not a Stoic, Hobbes's emphasis on natural law and the predictability of human behavior bore resemblance to Stoic causality. Cudworth, resisting Hobbes's cold, mechanistic view of society, pushed back in defense of the soul's freedom. John Sellers, in analyzing Cudworth's argument, draws attention to the ancient phrase, "in our power." This idea stretches through a long philosophical lineage from Aristotle and Chrysippus to Plotinus and Epictetus. But not all these thinkers meant the same thing. Early Stoics like Chrysippus took "up to us" to mean that we are partial causes of certain actions. Our choices play a role. Late Stoics like Epictetus were more restrictive. For him, the only things truly up to us are our internal judgments and intentions, things that no external force can control. Whether or not we succeed in carrying out an action doesn't matter. If I decide to walk outside but slip on ice and break my leg, the intention was mine, and that's all that counts. Epictetus's goal wasn't to map out metaphysics. He was a teacher focused on practical wisdom, helping his students avoid suffering by reminding them what they could and could not control. People are disturbed not by events, he said, but by their judgments about events. His concern was not whether we have metaphysical freedom, but how we can live without torment in a world we don't control. This pragmatic attitude aligns with what 20th century philosopher Isaiah Berlin later called positive freedom, the ability to shape one's life meaningfully rather than to be uncaused. Still, the Stoics weren't completely clear. Epictetus often invoked proheresis, our faculty of will, as the core of who we are. He also referred to the hegemonikon, the governing principle of the soul, encompassing not just our will but our impressions and impulses. These concepts hint at a nuanced psychology, if not a metaphysical claim. Modern thinkers might translate these ancient terms into neuroscience. Hemen maps to volition, proheresis to decision-making capacity, and hegemonikon to the prefrontal cortex, our brain's control center. But as Sellers points out, Epictetus doesn't ask whether our judgments are metaphysically free. He simply says they're what we have. His ethics rest on the fact that we can train our judgments, even if we can't escape causality. The real metaphysical discussion of free will, the kind we argue about today, can be traced not to the Stoics, but to Alexander of Aphrodisias, a philosopher who lived a century after Epictetus. In his version of De Fato, Alexander made a critical distinction. Something is up to us if we could have chosen differently. This is the foundation of what philosophers now call contra-causal free will, the ability to do otherwise. Cudworth seized on this idea, even though it wasn't in the Stoic system. Alexander believed that regret and self-reproach prove the existence of freedom. If we didn't have options, we wouldn't feel guilt or blame others. We assume that we can choose the opposite, he wrote, and not that all is laid down beforehand. His argument is psychological. We feel free, so we must be free. But modern science complicates this. Neuroscience shows we don't have access to the inner workings of our decisions. Our experience of choice is not reliable evidence of actual freedom. So where does that leave us? Cudworth projected a modern idea of freedom backward onto the Stoics. But for Epictetus, freedom wasn't metaphysical. It was ethical. It meant recognizing that while we cannot control the world, we can control how we relate to it. This is not the same as free will, at least not as Cudworth or Alexander imagined it. Epictetus even cautioned against moral blame. People do wrong not because they are evil, but because they are misled. They are blind, not physically, but morally. Should we punish the blind for being blind? He asks. The answer is no. Instead of anger, we need compassion. Imagine a world governed by this wisdom, where blame gives way to understanding and punishment gives way to healing. In the end, perhaps what matters is not whether we could have done otherwise, but whether we can learn to act wisely in the face of what is. Maybe that is the only freedom we've ever truly had.